My beloved child, remain here for just a moment, because something has shifted in a way that neither you nor the other soul expected. There was a moment so quiet that almost no one noticed it. No loud announcement. No dramatic scene. Just one realization, one truth, and everything that was carefully planned began to change direction. Imagine someone who believed they still had endless time suddenly discovering that the feelings they hoped were hidden had been real all along. What happens next? They stop delaying. They stop pretending. They stop convincing themselves that tomorrow is guaranteed. And that is where this story truly begins. There was a time when silence seemed stronger than words. Both hearts carried questions that never reached the surface. One wondered if speaking first would ruin everything. The other wondered if waiting longer was the wiser choice. Yet life has a strange way of revealing what careful plans try to hide. Sometimes it happens through a simple conversation. Sometimes through an unexpected memory. Sometimes through a single expression that cannot be explained. However it happened, the truth finally reached the one person who needed to hear it most. Pause for a second and think about this. What if someone you never stopped thinking about suddenly understood everything you had been unable to say? What if every uncertain glance, every unfinished sentence, every quiet wish suddenly formed one complete picture? That picture is far more powerful than either of you imagined. Stay a little longer, because this is only the beginning. The moment they realized your feelings were genuine, something inside them refused to remain still. Plans that once seemed important suddenly became background noise. Meetings lost their meaning. Careful schedules no longer felt urgent. Priorities quietly rearranged themselves without anyone asking them to. Not because of pressure. Not because of obligation. Because clarity has a remarkable effect on the human heart. Once uncertainty disappears, hesitation begins to fade with it. But here is the surprising part. They did not expect this realization to affect them so deeply. For a long time they believed they were in complete control of every decision. They convinced themselves they could move slowly, think carefully, and keep emotions at a comfortable distance. Then one undeniable truth entered the room, and every carefully built wall suddenly looked unnecessary. Have you ever noticed how quickly life changes when one missing piece finally appears? A puzzle can sit unfinished for years, yet the final piece transforms everything within seconds. That is exactly how this turning point feels. Nothing around them physically changed. Yet everything inside them did. Wait until the final moment of this chapter, because another layer is about to unfold. As this understanding settled into their thoughts, they began replaying memories they had almost forgotten. Small conversations suddenly carried new meaning. Ordinary moments became extraordinary. They remembered the kindness they overlooked. They remembered the patience they misunderstood. They remembered the quiet support that had always been present, even when neither of you recognized its importance. It was almost as though time itself whispered, "Look again." And they did. For the first time, they stopped searching for complicated answers and allowed themselves to accept the simplest one. Sometimes the strongest connection does not arrive with noise. Sometimes it grows silently until one undeniable moment brings everything into focus. This is why the title of today's story matters so much. Your true feelings were never as invisible as you believed. They simply needed the right moment to be understood. What if this very realization became the turning point that changed every future decision? What if the delay you once questioned was actually preparing both paths to meet with greater certainty? These questions are worth carrying for a little while longer, because their answers are beginning to reveal themselves. The energy around this story feels different now. It feels faster. More focused. More intentional. The waiting that once seemed endless is no longer driven by confusion. Instead, something new has entered the picture, a quiet determination that cannot easily be ignored. Picture someone standing in front of two roads. One is familiar, predictable, comfortable. The other requires courage, honesty, and movement. Most people hesitate at that crossroads. But when they finally discovered how deeply your feelings had always been rooted, remaining still no longer felt like the safer choice. Suddenly, moving forward became the only decision that made sense. Before you go, hear this carefully. Not every life-changing moment announces itself with dramatic signs. Some begin with a realization so personal that only two hearts can truly understand its weight. This is one of those moments. You are witnessing the first ripple before the entire wave becomes visible. And if you are still listening, hold on just a little longer. The next chapter reveals why they didn't simply change their thoughts, they abandoned every plan they believed mattered, because something far greater had begun calling them forward. Take a closer look now, because what happened after that realization was something even they could not have predicted. Most people think the hardest part of any journey is discovering the truth. It isn't. The hardest part is deciding what to do once the truth can no longer be ignored. That is exactly where your soulmate found themselves. They stood in the middle of ordinary life, yet nothing around them felt ordinary anymore. Every plan they had made only hours before suddenly seemed incomplete, as if those plans belonged to a different version of themselves. Think about this for a moment. Have you ever packed your entire day with responsibilities, only to realize that one unexpected message, one memory, or one realization instantly became more important than everything else? Life has a strange way of changing direction without asking permission. That is the invisible shift unfolding here. The more they reflected on your true feelings, the more one thought continued returning. What if I wait too long? That single question echoed louder than every excuse they had created before. Suddenly, tomorrow no longer felt guaranteed. The future stopped feeling like something that could always be postponed. They began to understand that meaningful opportunities rarely announce themselves twice. Stay with this story, because the next discovery changes everything. Instead of moving through their usual routine, they started noticing signs they had ignored for weeks. Familiar places reminded them of unfinished conversations. Familiar songs carried emotions they once brushed aside. Even ordinary moments seemed to whisper the same message: don't leave this chapter unfinished. At first they tried to remain logical. They told themselves to slow down. They reminded themselves to stay patient. Yet every attempt to return to normal only strengthened one undeniable feeling: they could no longer continue pretending nothing had changed. And this is where something remarkable happened. Rather than asking whether your feelings were real, they started asking whether they were ready to respond with the same honesty. That question was much more powerful. It wasn't about guessing anymore. It was about courage. It was about stepping beyond comfort and allowing truth to shape the next decision. If this story is speaking to you, take a quiet second to leave a comment about what part resonates most with your heart. If you're enjoying this journey, sharing it with someone and subscribing means you'll never miss the next chapter. Sometimes one story reaches exactly the person who needs it at the perfect time. Now listen carefully. Once their heart became clear, their actions slowly began following the same direction. Small tasks were postponed. Unimportant commitments quietly disappeared from their schedule. They weren't acting out of impulse. They were acting with a clarity they had never experienced before. For the first time in a long while, they stopped asking, "What should I avoid?" and began asking, "What truly deserves my attention?" That change transformed everything. Picture someone standing at a train station with several tickets in hand. Each ticket leads somewhere different. One offers familiarity. Another offers certainty. But only one leads toward the future they secretly hoped existed all along. After learning how deeply you truly felt, choosing became far less complicated. The destination was finally clear. Wait until the next part, because this wasn't just an emotional decision. Something unexpected happened immediately afterward, something that made them leave behind every remaining hesitation. The distance between intention and action became smaller than either of you could have imagined, and the journey they never expected to begin was finally about to start. Listen carefully. Because this is the moment where everything begins to move faster than anyone expected. Until now, your soulmate had been carrying two different versions of the future inside their mind. One future was built on waiting, wondering, and convincing themselves that there would always be another chance. The other future asked them to trust what they finally knew. For a while, they stood between those two paths. Then something unexpected happened. They stopped asking, "What if I'm wrong?" and started asking, "What if this is the opportunity I've been searching for all along?" That single question changed the atmosphere around them. The hesitation that once felt impossible to overcome suddenly became smaller than their desire to move forward. Every excuse they had repeated to themselves lost its strength. They realized that fear had been speaking louder than truth, and for the first time, they chose not to listen to fear. Stay a little longer, because the next realization explains why they dropped every plan. When they looked at the schedule they had prepared, it no longer felt important. Meetings could wait. Small responsibilities could be rearranged. Ordinary routines could happen another day. None of those things carried the same meaning anymore. Their attention kept returning to one thought, almost like a quiet voice repeating the same message over and over. Don't let another meaningful moment become another missed opportunity. That thought refused to disappear. Have you ever noticed how life suddenly becomes clear after weeks of confusion? Nothing outside changes immediately, yet inside, every answer seems to arrive at once. That is exactly what they experienced. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was calm certainty. And calm certainty is often stronger than excitement because it doesn't disappear when emotions settle. For a long time, they believed they needed the perfect time to take the next step. Now they understood something completely different. The perfect time was never hiding somewhere in the future. It was created the moment they accepted the truth. Pause here for just a second. What if every delay in this story had actually been preparing both hearts for this exact turning point? What if every unanswered question was quietly leading toward one clear decision? Sometimes life doesn't reveal the destination first. It reveals the courage first, then opens the road afterward. That is why this chapter feels different. Instead of imagining endless possibilities, your soulmate finally chose one direction. Once that happened, their energy completely shifted. Even the people around them started noticing that something had changed. They smiled without realizing it. They became quieter in some moments and more determined in others. Their attention drifted away from ordinary conversations because their thoughts kept returning to the same place. Not because they were distracted. Because they had found clarity. Wait until the final lines of this chapter, you won't want to miss them. As evening approached, they looked back on everything that had happened during the day. It almost felt unreal. Just hours earlier, they had been following the same routine as always. Now it felt like an entirely different chapter had begun. The future no longer looked distant. It felt close enough to reach. They realized something that surprised even them. Sometimes the greatest journey doesn't begin when someone discovers another person's feelings. It begins when they finally stop running from their own. That realization filled them with a quiet confidence they had never experienced before. They no longer wanted to wonder what could have been. They wanted to experience what could still become. Every passing minute strengthened that decision instead of weakening it. Before this chapter ends, hear one more thought. The reason they are rushing isn't because life suddenly became chaotic. They are moving because their heart has finally become focused. There is a huge difference between acting out of pressure and acting with purpose. Purpose always moves with calm determination, and that is exactly the path unfolding now. In the next chapter, you'll discover the surprising moment when they finally leave everything behind and begin the journey that changes both of your stories forever. Stay with this until the end, because the most unforgettable part has not arrived yet. A quiet shift is happening right now, and if you leave too soon, you'll miss the moment that changes the entire direction of this story. Until this point, everything had been happening inside your soulmate's heart. Thoughts were changing. Priorities were changing. The future itself seemed to be rearranging. But now, something different begins. The inner decision becomes an outward action. For several long moments, they simply stood still. Not because they were uncertain anymore. Because they were realizing there was no reason left to wait. The room around them looked exactly the same, yet it somehow felt unfamiliar. The plans they had carefully written down no longer carried the same importance. One by one, they crossed out commitments that only yesterday seemed impossible to postpone. Every cancelled plan felt less like a sacrifice and more like making space for something that truly mattered. Think about that for a second. How often does a person willingly leave behind comfort unless they have found something more meaningful? That is the question quietly shaping this chapter. Stay until the final words, because what happened next surprised even them. As they prepared to leave, memories began returning one after another. Not the loud memories everyone talks about, but the small ones that usually disappear into ordinary life. A smile they once overlooked. A conversation that ended too quickly. A kind gesture they never properly appreciated. Those moments suddenly became impossible to ignore. It was as though the past had been waiting for this exact day to reveal its true meaning. The more they remembered, the stronger their determination became. There was no dramatic announcement. No crowd cheering them forward. Just one calm realization. I don't want another day to pass wondering what could happen if I simply choose courage. That sentence echoed through every decision they made. Imagine standing at the beginning of a bridge you've been afraid to cross for months. From a distance it looks uncertain. But once your first step touches the bridge, something unexpected happens. The fear doesn't disappear because the bridge changed. It disappears because you changed. That is exactly where your soulmate now stands. Before taking another step, they paused for one final look behind them, not because they wanted to return, but because they wanted to appreciate how far they had already come. Every delay, every unanswered question, every season of uncertainty had quietly prepared them for this exact moment. And then, without another excuse, without another promise to do it someday, they finally moved forward. The road ahead wasn't perfectly visible, but that no longer mattered. They had discovered something greater than certainty. They had discovered purpose. Purpose has a remarkable way of lighting the next step even when the entire journey cannot yet be seen. Wait a little longer. Because this is where the story becomes even more unexpected. As they continued moving, an unusual sense of peace settled over them. Instead of questioning every choice, they felt confidence growing with each passing moment. The closer they came to acting on what they had learned, the lighter everything else seemed to become. The doubts that once filled every quiet moment slowly faded into the background. Then another thought entered their mind. What if this isn't just changing my future, what if it's changing both of ours? That question stayed with them. It wasn't about fantasy. It wasn't about guessing. It was about recognizing that genuine understanding often arrives quietly before life begins opening new doors. Before this chapter closes, hear one final truth. Sometimes people believe destiny arrives with loud signs and dramatic moments. But more often, it arrives disguised as one simple decision made with complete honesty. The choice to stop delaying. The choice to stop hiding. The choice to finally move toward what has always mattered. Your soulmate has reached that point. In the next chapter, you'll discover what happens when the distance between intention and reality becomes smaller than ever before. And why the moment they have been rushing toward is closer than anyone realizes.